Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings started in 2007 and run through today and probably the rest of my life. My name is Jason Frank. I'm a native of Colorado, and my Bigfoot relationships adventure started in March of 2007. They number in the hundreds of encounters with a few sightings, usually right outside the tent, but I don't see them that often. I continually look for them. I interact with a certain group of them, and some other ones I'm trying to reach out to as well. I've done some pretty crazy things in this subject. I broke into the subject very hard. Started with finding some tracks behind Pikes Peak while I was hunting turkeys with my wife. And that started me down this trail. I could sit here all day long and tell you guys story after story after story. But I guess the most important one for me and many of my friends as well, I'm not the only one that has seen this individual Sasquatch. It's not exactly a horror story. I'll try to summarize this in my relationship with the one that I named Elvis, how that came to be. I actually wrote a book about Elvis and his family in my book called Harry's. I also have a YouTube called Bigfoot of the Rockies Outdoor Adventures and bigfootoftherockies.com. But that kind of summarizes him and his family. I prefer to interact with them. I have a very friendly relationship with them, including one count of physical contact with them. But anyway, my relationship with Elvis started, and I'm not even really sure on the year. I'd have to go back and look, but I think it's 2010. It would have been in July, maybe 2011. I can't remember. It was a very intense experience. One of the only 3 times where I've actually pulled a gun on them. And really, it wasn't that they were being so aggressive that I thought they were going to harm us, but mainly it's the one and only time I've ever encountered one with a baby. And I didn't know how they were going to react with the baby. Basically, what it was is I took a guy that I'd worked with who was a huge skeptic out camping with me. And I'd been doing this for several years up to that point, and I've been trying to establish a relationship with this group. There's a rather large group of them up there. This is in northern Colorado. And during that whole period of time, by accident, I really wasn't even trying to bring this individual up there because it was kind of my secret spot, and I've been working so hard to establish this relationship. But we're going to go to a different spot. This is also in my book, and where I'd actually gotten tissue from one just a few months earlier, and had one chew on my coffee pot and stuff. But anyway, the bridge was washed out due to bad weather and to divert it, and I was afraid this guy would go back to work and tell everybody that I was, full of it. So we diverted, and I took him to my favorite spot, and we camped on the side of a mountain. It's an extremely steep mountain, really rugged, and I intentionally put us on the end of this dead-end road so that he couldn't say that somebody was hoaxing us or that we had some kind of human intervention or whatever else. It wasn't my normal favorite spot. It was a couple miles up the mountain. And we went up there for 5 days, and it was pretty boring. Anybody that's really wanting to have an interaction or have an encounter, I tell everybody to make sure that you really try to put yourself in their shoes. They're extremely curious, and they want to check us out. So by that, you can't ever leave your camp. They want to play with your camp if they're around. The shiny objects, your vehicles, all that stuff are things that they find interesting. And if you leave for even just a few minutes. They will run in, satisfy their curiosity, run out, and continue to watch you, and you'll never know they were there. So we had to sit there for days on end. And it's really quite boring. It's really a test in patience. Luckily, I hunt all the time, and I'm very stubborn. I can sit out there for days on end. But it had been really pretty good weather. Most of the good encounters that I have happen in really bad weather, usually rain or heavy wind. It washes away their tracks, it washes away their noise, and it makes them very bold. And so after several days of this guy getting really anxious and wanting to go hiking and go fishing and doing different things, the last night we were going to be there, it started raining, and I knew that they had been just dying to see us for a long time. So their patience usually runs out at about 3 days, and I think we were there, 5 days. So they were really anxious to see us and, check things out. And so we went to bed, and I told the guy with me, this is the night they're going to come in. They've been waiting all this time. I know you don't believe me. He still thought that there was no such thing and that I was just crazy. So we're laying in the tent. It's pouring down rain. There's giant boulders coming down off the cliffs above us and lightning, and it's just gushing. It's like straight out of just a horror film. It really was very intense. You didn't even know if the tent was going to get hit by lightning. We're at probably, 13,000 feet. Quite a high elevation. I'd have to look at the map to be sure. And at that elevation, especially on the edge of a cliff, there's a lot of erosion, big boulders coming down off the mountains. And the lightning is so intense that it's like a flash on a camera. When it goes off, you can see everything outside the tent, through the silhouettes and whatnot. We went to bed, and I had a metal trailer from my motorcycle we've been using to haul firewood, which was intended to take us down the trail at the other location, but since we couldn't get there, so the trailer was just parked right behind the tent, little ATV garden trailer. And about 2 a.m, I wake up and I can hear these fingers drumming on the side of the trailer that just kind of sounded like, and then you could hear like the claws going across the paint and just like scraping the paint. And I thought, oh my God, here we go again. And this is not the first time I've been in this situation. By that point, I had probably had this happen to me at least a dozen times, where they're that close, where you can hear them breathing, you can hear their stomachs growl. They're literally 2 or 3 feet away from you, maybe standing over the top of the tent. I've had them play with the tent a couple times up to this point. I was totally okay with it. They had never tried to harm me. So I wake up the guy next to me, and at this point he was still a skeptic, and he rolled over and he said, "What?" And I'm like pointing at this thing, and I'm like, "Shh, be quiet." And I'm pointing at this thing, and it's still raining really hard. The wind is going and the lightning's going off, and you can just, when it lights everything up, if there's something standing next to the tent, you're going to see it. And all of this stuff's going on, and he's still looking at me like I'm crazy. And all of a sudden we hear this big, humongous set of lungs just go. And at that point, he started freaking out, and I'm trying to keep him calm. We did have firearms in the tent just in case. And he was trying to reach for his, and I'm calming him down. I'm like, no, you don't need that. You don't need that. This is what they do. He's not going to hurt us. And the next thing you know is it starts picking on the tent, and it starts pushing on the tent. And the tent itself was a triangular-shaped green Eureka tent, backpacking tent. And I'd say it was probably about 4 feet tall. And it started pushing on the tip of the tent, and it would push the tent down a couple feet and then let the tent back up, and then push the tent back down and let the tent back up. And you could clearly see the size of this hand. And the size of this hand is like easily the size of a large frying pan. I mean, just enormous. I mean, it was just a huge hand. And it had fingers, and you could see the claws on the ends of it. And it did that several times. It did not freak me out. Again, I had gotten somewhat used to this. This was not the first time this had happened to me. But my roommate in the tent there was having a hard time with it. This went on, I would say, it seemed like a long time. It's not like you can look at your watch, but I would guess 20, 25 minutes. A very long time. And you could hear everything from it breathing. You could hear mucus in its nose. You could hear like stomach growling. I mean, all these biological things. I don't remember hearing it fart on that occasion, but I have heard them fart before. And, this went on for quite a while. I was quite okay with it. My roommate was not. I hadn't even reached for my handgun or anything in the tent. And then all of a sudden we heard this whimpering that was over near our kitchen area, which I did have a camera set up, which we did get some, not real definitive pictures. I got a few pictures later. We found out we got pictures of fingers and a couple sets of glowing eyes above the tent before they actually put the camera down on its face. But we didn't find that out till later in the morning. But anyway, this baby started crying in the bushes. I'd say it was over right by our kitchen area, maybe 35 feet away, 40 feet away, and that was right off the edge of the cliff and where all the trees were. It was really, really rugged down there. And it sounded just like a toddler mixed with a bobcat. I say this like a million times, but that's exactly what it sounded like. It was just like a toddler that was upset in the grocery store mixed with a cat, and it was kind of and it started walking towards the tent. That freaked me out. That had never happened to me before. And it hasn't happened to me since. And I'd never encountered one with a baby. And, of course, the mama bear situation, that makes everybody that knows anything, makes you nervous. So, yes, I grabbed my gun. I didn't know if the one that had been playing with our tent was going to be on top of us. And this thing easily could have been a couple 1,000 pounds. It was enormous. I don't know how big it was. The hand was huge, and the fingers were really, really enormous. But anyway, the baby cried several times and came up to the front of the tent, cried a couple more times and kind of sniffled its nose. And then the mother or father, whichever one was behind the tent, just like an adult human, kind of made a big sigh, kind of like a, like I told you to stay over there, and I think he was having fun playing, and then the baby made it dangerous. So then it walked around the left side of the tent over by my friend and tripped on the tie downs for the rain fly of the tent, and then walked over and picked the baby up and walked off in the dark. I've told this story several times in the public, and walked off, and the guy next to me, rolled over and said some really choice words that I can't say on this show. He was quite terrified, and he was ready to leave right then. And I said, "No, this is what we're here for. He didn't hurt us. He could have hurt us, and they didn't do anything. We're staying here. This is what I do." And he goes like, with those things out there, and I'm like, "Yes, they've been out there all week. You just didn't believe me. I know they've been watching us this whole time. They haven't done anything. They're not going to hurt us now." So I went back to bed. And long story short, we got up the next morning, and we did get some physical evidence. Even though the pouring rain had washed most of it away, we did have a really large finger that had poked through the contractor bag we had hanging in the tree behind the tent, which is on display at the Sasquatch outpost in Bailey, Colorado. It's on the wall there. And that is 100% real. And it's a finger that's probably 3 times the size of 3 of my fingers put together with a claw on the end of it. And it poked through that heavy-duty plastic and actually left an imprint of the back of the knuckle. We also got 3 photographs of black gorilla-like fingers in front of the camera that was on my picnic table aimed at the tent just before the camera got laid down, and then got the 2 sets of green eyes above the tent as well. So that was the first time I met Elvis. He was the little baby that walked up to the door, I believe. I can't be 100% sure. I can only go by how familiar he seemed to be with me from here on out. It was a couple years later. I'm sure he was coming around because I go up there all the time. I'm sure he was coming around, but it's hard to tell when you're laying in the tent. You hear them walking around and talking, which mostly consists of clicking and whistles with a little bit of Japanese samurai chatter, but it's usually very quiet. It's in a whispering tone, but it's usually clicking, whistling, some rock clacks, that kind of thing. And then you'll hear them digging through your dry boxes or playing with your car antenna or any number of things. I put all kinds of little things out for them to play with, banging cups together, these kinds of things. But it was a few years later, and this is when I named him because he kept coming around. And I just guessed that it was him because it seemed like every time I saw him, he was just a little bit bigger, just a little bit bigger. And we went up there for a big trip with a Bigfoot group. And I had gone up a couple days earlier. I'm kind of one of the guys that helps out with that group. I don't know if I can name them or not. But so I went up there, and this is about 2 miles down the road from where I had this encounter with the baby. Like I said, I think it was about 2-3 years later. And I had set my camp up in the trees with a 10 by 10 Kodiak Alaskan canvas tent, which I still use. It's an awesome tent. And the Squatches have actually gotten to know me quite well because of that tent. But I had the tent set up, and I had two 12 by 12 awnings, one over the tent because it's kind of keeping the tree sap off the tent, and then another one over the kitchen area. And had set up my kitchen area, and I had the awnings were new, so I had the cardboard boxes for the awnings, and I was using the cardboard actually to shim up and balance out my tables that were in the kitchen area. And my friend Matt had come up, and he'd gotten there late that evening, and it was raining really hard, and he didn't want to set up his camp. And I'd already had the tent set up and had a cot set up for my wife. We have 2 cots inside of there. It fits in there just perfect. I had 2 cots set in there, and since it was raining hard, he asked if he could sleep in the tent with me on that cot for the night, since my wife wasn't there. I said, sure, why not? So we're laying there in the tent, and I think it started around 11 o'clock at night. I'm not sure. Like I said, there's been so many encounters, it's hard to keep all this stuff straight, but it was around 11. It wasn't super late. The lightning's going on, and it's just pouring rain out there again. And I had put up a gutter in front of where the 2 awnings had met in front of my tent. The rain kept dumping down on the front door of my tent. And to keep the rain off, and knowing that I was going to be there, I think I was going to be there 7 to 10 days. I can't remember. It was quite a while. I had set up a makeshift gutter made out of some plastic that I had brought, actually as an experiment, trying to get the Sasquatches to poke their finger through the plastic again, which they still haven't done it on command. They do it when you don't expect it. But I had put a plastic tub outside to collect the rainwater and, use for a shower later on because water's hard to come by. And so we're laying in the tent, and all of a sudden, in the middle of this rainstorm, we hear this thing that sounds like a chimpanzee walk right up on the side of the tent, on the opposite side of the tent where I was laying, where Matt was laying in the cot. And you could just hear this thing. It was just like a chimpanzee, and it would make the and then it'd walk up and it'd start splashing and playing in that water tub, which is literally 6 inches from Matt's left foot inside the tent. It's just barely outside the tent. And he'd splash in it for like 20, 30 seconds, and then he'd stop and he'd run back into the bushes. And then you'd wait another 10 minutes and he'd come back. And you could tell, just by his size, by the way his voice sounded and the height of him, in my mind, I'm thinking he was, 4 or 5 feet tall, maybe 110 pounds. He didn't sound very big. Again, you're not like you're looking at him. It's just hearing it. It was all audible. And he did this all night long. He came back and forth. I don't even know how many times he did that. And it was incredible because we just sat there staring at each other as this thing is just carrying on. And we get up the next morning, go out there, and this tub of water that should have been pristinely clean had like mud and leaves and rocks in it because he was playing in that water. And there was actually a hair floating in there that I did collect. It is on display at that museum as well. He also clawed up a roll of paper towels that was in the awning above where the water was collecting. I had a roll of paper towels that was hanging up there on a broken arrow that I had broken at archery season the year before, just using it as a towel thing. And you could see where his fingernails had clawed down the center of the paper towels. He also poked a sheet of the cardboard, which we gave to a new guy on this trip. I don't know whatever happened to him. It was his first encounter. So I was like, you can have that. I got lots of this stuff. But there was a sheet of cardboard that he had poked his finger through, I'd say 25, 30 times. There's just a real compulsion. Like he just really loved just poking this cardboard, So that was the first night. And I still hadn't named him at that point. So that day went on, the storm blew out, and Matt set up his tent and everything, which was about 40 feet away from me in an open area across the road. And the next night, my friend Kenny Collins, who's another really well-known researcher, super awesome dude. He's had lots and lots of encounters up there as well. We work very closely together, and he's actually gotten to know Elvis quite a bit over the last few years. But Kenny showed up, and he was going to set his tent over there next to me, and I told him, yeah, you should do that. There's another research area that's about a half a mile down the road in this really dark area that's pretty popular, and a lot of my friends have had some really amazing encounters down there. He said, I think I'm going to go down there. And I said, I don't think so. I think you should stay up here, because he was right here playing in this water pan all night long last night. He's around here. No, I think I'm going to go down there. So he didn't stay there that night. So the only people on the mountain at that point was me and Matt and Kenny were the only ones in this whole huge area. Kenny was, like I said, about a half a mile down in this big, deep area. And we had somebody show up that was from the trip that showed up about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't raining that night. It was pretty calm, and I'm just sleeping in my tent. And about 1 in the morning, I wake up to somebody slamming a car door, and I wake up and I realize that somebody is shining a huge bright light on the front of my tent. Come to find out, it was his headlights of his car. This guy showed up about 1 in the morning and backed up and was unloading his car next to Matt's tent. And his headlights were right on the front of my tent, which shined through my kitchen area. And I'm halfway asleep, and I look up and I see this figure standing right in front of my tent. I mean, it was a perfect silhouette. I'd say 5.5, maybe 6 feet tall. That's kind of pushing it. I'd guess maybe 150 pounds, maybe. Looked very human-like, except for the head was just enormous. And, I'm still halfway asleep, and I'm like looking at this guy, and I'm thinking it's a human being. And I'm like, who is this person standing in my kitchen area, and what's he doing here? And I'm like looking at him, and like, why is he wearing a motorcycle helmet? Because his head was just huge. And he was stuck in that, I guess, stereotypical Sasquatch pose that you see on everybody's, posters and their signs and all this stuff. And at the time, I'm like, why does it looked like he had like a flannel shirt that was unbuttoned and his sleeves were hanging way down. I now know it was his hair, but at the time, waking up, this is just some strange dude with a motorcycle helmet and a flannel shirt that isn't buttoned up. And I just stared at him for a few seconds, and then all of a sudden he darted off to my left and ran back into the woods from where he had been the night before coming from to play in the water. And there's no road access out there. It's just woods. I'm like, why is this guy running off into the woods? Then I realized, that wasn't a human being that was standing there. That was the same one that had been playing in my kitchen the night before. And he looked just like Elvis. That's why I named him Elvis. That pose, he looked like Elvis with the big, extravagant, huge coats that he used to wear with the big collars, except for he was wearing a motorcycle helmet. So I kind of just went back to bed, wrote that all off. And of course, Kenny was bummed out because he missed Elvis that night. So I named him Elvis. The next day comes around, and by then we had all the campers show up. Everybody was there. And they're all meeting all of us that are used to going to this area. And I'm talking to some of my friends. And actually, before I'd gone down, one of my friends had said, hey, you mind if I use your toilet? And I usually have a 5-gallon bucket with a toilet seat that's in the bushes, so you don't make a mess of the woods, which is also a huge Sasquatch attractant. I don't know what it is about human poo and those trash bags, but man, they love that. They have stolen so many of those. That's just a tip for you guys. But I said, yeah, go ahead. It's behind the tent and the bushes back there. And I proceeded to go on down over by Matt's tent, was talking with everybody. We had some campfires going. It was dark. And I'm sitting there talking with another one of my friends who had just got one of the new models. This is back when they first came out with the little thermal imagers you plug into your phone. He'd never even pulled it out of the box. It was brand new. And so we're sitting there looking at it. And the other friend that was using the toilet comes down. And he says, what are you doing here? And I said, what do you mean? I've been here for several minutes. And he said, no, I just heard you up there at your tent just a couple seconds ago. And I said, that was definitely not me. So we plugged in the thermal imager into my friend's phone, and we started scanning my tent. And we're talking maybe 40, 45 feet away, maybe. And I had the lantern going in my kitchen area, so it's illuminating the front of my tent. But everything to the left and right of my tent is in the darkness. And plain as day in the thermal imagery, we see this figure, again, about 5.5 feet tall, just standing motionless to the left of my tent, like watching us. And, of course, we're both looking at it like, oh, my God, there it is, and we're looking at it. And, of course, the new people were looking at the screen, so we all got to look. And my friend, since he just got it, he was trying to figure out how to even record. He didn't even know how to run in this thing. He never even played with it. And we're all excited. And as we're watching this thing, more and more people started watching the screen, and it started to get agitated, and it was kind of swaying back and forth. And then it darted off to our right, which brought it right in front of my tent, in front of the lantern. So we got to see it run underneath the lantern light in front of my tent and ran to the right side of the tent into the dark again, where I had a makeshift table built with a little portable barbecue grill that was over the little gas grill. And it tried to hide behind the gas grill, and it was swaying back and forth and ducking and looking and ducking and looking. And everybody got to see this thing. And then it eventually darted off back into the woods again, and it kept running off in the same direction. So nothing much after that happened, and I went to bed. Well, actually, I was getting ready to go to bed, and then my wife showed up, and it was pretty late in the night, and her and the rest of the women decided to go out to try to get some activity going. And so they went on a hike together down the road down to where Kenny was camping, and they had like chem lights on strings and doing different things and trying to make a big scene to, get the Bigfoots interested. And I hadn't even had a chance to tell my wife about all the things that had happened, before she even came up, because this is like the second or third day. So she comes up, and by then, I don't know, I guess it was about midnight or so. It was pretty late. It was really dark. And she had her chem light, and I said, well, just hang that inside the tent and use it as a night light in case you have to get him to go to the bathroom. You don't have to trip on anything. So we have it hanging from this little D-ring above her head in this tent. The tent's pretty tall. It's got it's like 7 feet tall inside. And an hour or so later, I wake up and I roll over and look at the cot on her side, and I see the chem light moving. It's like it kind of swing out and then drop and then bump off at the tent and then swing out and then drop and bump off the tent. And I saw it do this several times, and I thought I was hallucinating. And I'm looking at this thing, and once I realized that I really wasn't hallucinating, I was able to wake her up. And it was directly above her, so she just had to look straight up in the air, and you could actually see it. And there was something outside with a finger that was poking that glowing light, and it would poke the chem light and then let it go, and poke the chem light and let it go. And it didn't make any noise. I don't remember it making any monkey noises. I don't even remember hearing it walk away, but it did that several times. And we went to bed. And that was kind of the summary of that whole weekend that I named Elvis. And those kind of encounters continued to happen from then all the way up until, present day. This happens to me almost every summer. He keeps coming around. He keeps getting bigger and bigger. I've had like fleeting glimpses of him. He definitely will like talk to me through the side of the tent. He did that to me last year. But again, he's still very shy about letting us see him. Kenny has pictures of him, got pictures of him stealing some sheep a couple years ago. But I can tell you the description of him. So the last time that I had an actual visual of him, and again, I know them more by their voices than I do what they look like, because their voices are very distinctive and their personalities are very distinctive. And he's very interactive. He knows that I'm not going to hurt him, that I'm there to see him and his family as well. But he's just a lot of fun. So we go back probably 5 or 6 years ago, and we go up there, and I had Jim Myers, the owner of the Sasquatch Outpost, with me. It was the very first trip Jim had ever gone with me. And also a very well-known radio personality went with me up there. And I had told her she didn't want to sleep in a tent. She wanted to sleep in my truck. And I said, Elvis is when it comes to interacting with me, he's very blatant. And it can really mess with people when you see these things. They're not exactly beautiful. In my eyes, they're beautiful in their own way, but it's not like, it's rather unsettling to see them a lot of times. But they can't help that. It's just the way they look. But anyway, so I told her, I said, if you sleep in my truck, he's probably going to think you're me, and he may approach. And he did. She got a good close look at him, which is well documented on different radio programs. So Jim got to meet Elvis as well on that trip. Elvis came right up to the tent and was playing with the tent. Actually, the same tent as well from the previous story. And like I said, that's happened to me so many times, and Elvis is getting so much bigger. But really, the best visual that I've seen of him, again, I'm trying to remember when this happened. It had to have been maybe 6 years ago. It's been a while. And me and my buddies were up there in my favorite campsite where I've had numerous encounters with them. We all have. I've gotten hundreds of footprints there, handprints. I mean, you name it. I've had them gift and play jokes on me. Elvis has put a boulder in my chair in the middle of the day while I was cutting wood. And just endless things that happen at this particular spot. But we were sitting there in an afternoon, and we didn't have the fire going, and me and a friend of mine were talking, and he was sitting on the opposite side of the fire pit from me. And directly behind him is kind of a slowly sloping hill that goes into a really thick timbered area. It's mostly aspens with a couple of pine trees and a lot of deadfall and thick grass and that kind of stuff. And it was really just a fluke moment of really getting to see him. But I'm sitting there talking, and we're just visiting, and, a bunch of the other guys are doing camp things, working on their tents or whatever else. We're just sitting in our chairs hanging out. And I'm looking at him, and if I hadn't been looking right at him, Elvis's face was about 60 feet away, maybe 70 feet away, and this is right in the middle of the day. It's like 2 p.m. And it was directly over my friend's right shoulder as he's facing me. And if I hadn't been looking at him, I never would have noticed even Elvis behind him, because he was perfectly camouflaged. And he was on his stomach in the shade of this aspen tree, and there was an old dead log that was laid back there, really rotten, and it had lots of grass growing up and different little bushes and stuff. And I just happened to see these 2 black eyes. I mean, they were just like completely black eyes. And they're looking at me over this log, and I could see his face. His skin was jet black. His hair was jet black with a slight red tinge to it. He wasn't huge. I would have to guess. I mean, I didn't see him stand up because he crawled away, but by the size of his head and just knowing his body build after seeing him before, I would say he was maybe 7 feet tall. And, that sounds huge, but there's one in that group that we have tracks in our camp from him that is 13 feet tall and several thousand pounds. I mean, he's just massive. I haven't seen him. We've got a lot of evidence, and some of my friends and my father have seen him, but I haven't seen him. But anyway, he was about 7 feet tall. I would estimate, 400 pounds maybe. He had that dark hair, matted just like you would think. His nose was kind of flat, kind of like a boxer's nose. He had rather large eyes. He didn't have a really pronounced brow. People say that their heads are conical. His head wasn't really conical. It was a little bit conical, but more rounded, with a lot of hair. It was kind of matted up, had a lot of dirt and, sticks in it and whatnot. And I could see his parts of his hands that were up on the log. And, I had this whole time of looking at him I couldn't believe what I was looking at. And I was like, am I really seeing this, or am I just seeing something that's not there? Because he was just completely motionless. And I'd say it was probably 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes long. And my friend kept noticing that I was looking at him really weird. And he says, what are you looking at? And I said, I swear there's a face behind that log directly behind you. And he kind of just nonchalantly looked over his shoulder, and he looked back at me, and he said, that is a face. And I'm thinking, yes, it is. And he had another one of those thermal imagers that we had just talked about, and it was in his shirt pocket. And he started digging for that thermal imager, because if I'd even taken a picture of that, it would have just looked like a blob swatch to anybody else. I mean, the thing was just so well camouflaged. If he hadn't have been right over my friend's shoulder, I never would have seen him. I mean, that was a master camouflage job. So we were going to try to get a picture of him with a thermal over his shoulder. Well, as soon as Elvis saw him messing with his pocket, he knew something was up. And I started to see his face kind of start to sink down back behind the log. And I said, oh my God. I said, he knows that something's up, and he's running away. He's running away. And my friend said, like heck he is. And he jumped up and started chasing him. And I never did see him after he sunk down behind the log. I didn't see him rise up and start running away. I guess he crawled really fast on his stomach into the timber and then started running upright. I never saw any of that. The last part that I saw before my friend started chasing him was his face and his hands sinking down behind the log. That was the last thing that I saw. And he ran off, and then they was gone for several minutes. And then he came back, and I said, "Did you see him?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw him. I didn't get any pictures. I saw the back of his head." That's all I could say. And so we just sat down, hoping he'd come back. And anyway, it was an hour or so later, one of my friends called me away to go help, and I got up and I took a few steps away, and my friend that had chased it got hit with a rock, like a small rock, like, "Don't be chasing me." And that's a typical Elvis thing. But I would say that's the best sighting I've had of Elvis in all my years of doing this and taking all these, oh man, I don't even know how many nights. It's got to be in the thousands of nights out there. But I've had, I'd say 6 or 8 really good daytime sightings out of all those. Maybe 20 or 30 nighttime sightings, which you can't say a whole lot. It's just a shadow running in the dark, right? Lots and lots of times of them walking around the tent, mostly doing their clicking and chattering. Sometimes they'll stand over the tent and scream right in your face. It sounds like a freight train screaming at you. But most of the time, like I said, I've never really felt threatened. I had one a few years ago at that same location that actually touched my face. This is on my YouTube channel. I didn't film it because I had the GoPro next to my bed there, and I didn't know how to turn the beep off, and I didn't want to ruin the encounter. But at this same location, I did have one actually push my face into my bed. But I didn't feel even remotely threatened. I know that sounds crazy to a lot of you guys. When it's happened so many times, he was just playing with my pillow and my head got in the way. I have some terrifying stories, but I'd rather not share those with you right now. But it's like 3 times out of all of these times that I've actually been really terrified of them. That's not to say they're not dangerous. Like any other creature, it could go bad at any time. But, as far as like the descriptions, I really could just describe their voices and their language more than I can their physical attributes, because most of my encounters involve the language. And they will answer when they trust you, which happened to me last summer with Elvis. It's happened to me before, but when they're out there, if you talk to them and they know you, they will answer you. And he has learned his name. I think he attempts to say my name, but mainly it's just he just kind of grunts or cackles or whatever just to answer me and let me know, yeah, I hear you, and everything's cool. But it's been quite an amazing ride. I'm looking forward to the spring thaw. I'm chomping at the bit to get back out there again right now and see some other ones. And I'm trying to, make the same kind of relationship with other groups around closer to home. We'll see where all that goes. But that is my Bigfoot story. Like I said, I've written this book about it. You can look it up on my website, and I've interviewed on this numerous times. I do lectures on this all the time. But thank you for letting me tell you my Bigfoot story there, Vic. I appreciate it. Thank you for the chance to speak.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.